Imagine sending your children off to Girl Scout camp only for it to be the last time you see them alive. In June of 1997, 3 families sent their daughters, Lori Farmer, 8, Michelle Gousset, 9, and Denise Milner, 10, off to Camp Scott Girl Scout Camp in Locust Grove, Oklahoma. Doris Denise Milner had told her mother earlier that day before she boarded the bus that she didn't want to go, but her mother told her everything would be fine and if she didn't feel well when she got there, then to give them a call and they'd pick her up. Sadly, Doris Milner never got to make any calls to her mother after that day. That night, the 3 girls went to sleep in their tents and a thunderstorm rolled into the early hours of the next morning. The tents were fanned out around the counselors' quarters in order to keep an eye on the girls. However, the tent that Farmer, Gousset, and Milner were in was the farthest and hardest to see. A counselor named Carla Willite heard a guttural moan sound coming from the main road and went to investigate, but ended up assuming that it was an animal from the main road and returned to bed. The next morning at 6 a.m., she made a grisly discovery on her way to the showers. She discovered the bodies of the 3 girls on the side of the trail in their sleeping bags nearly 150 yards from their tent. When police arrived, they found the girls' tent covered in blood. These 3 young, innocent girls had been sexually assaulted and murdered in gruesome ways. As they investigated the events of that night, they found out the strange noises that several other campers heard throughout the night. Around 1:30 a.m., multiple people heard moaning noises, which is around the same time that Willite heard it and went to investigate but couldn't find the source. Approximately 30 minutes later, a camper in Tent 7 was awoken by someone with a flashlight opening the flap to the tent. Around 3 in the morning, another girl heard a scream coming from where Tent 8 was located, which is the tent that the girls were staying in. At the same time, another camper heard a scream followed by someone crying, "Mama, Mama!" Unsure what to do, both girls went back to sleep. Throughout the 400-acre campsite, they found duct tape, rope, a flashlight, and women's eyeglasses in tent number 8. The flashlight had newspaper stuffed inside to keep the batteries from rattling and duct tape over the lens to dull the light. The duct tape and rope matched the kind that was used on the 3 girls. In a nearby cave, police found evidence that someone had been living inside. The newspapers inside matched the issue that was inside the flashlight. If that wasn't enough evidence, the words, "The killer was here, bye-bye fools, 77-6-17 were written on the cave wall. Police were hoping that all of this evidence would lead them to the killer. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2, The Girl Scout Murders. On June 13, 1977, the bodies of 3 young girls attending Girl Scout camp in Locust Grove, Oklahoma is found stuffed in their sleeping bags along the trail. Police find an overwhelming amount of evidence that points to a 33-year-old man named Gene Leroy Hart. He had been sentenced to life in prison years earlier for kidnapping and sexually assaulting 2 pregnant women. However, he had escaped from jail and believed to still be in the area when the murders took place. Following a 10-month search, a tip led police to a cabin in Cherokee County, 45 miles away from Camp Scott, where they arrested Hart. Remembering that Hart had tried on the eyeglasses of the 2 Tulsa women he assaulted in 1966, and remembering the eyeglasses that were stolen and discarded from the tents at Camp Scott, it was noticed by all of the arresting officers that Hart was wearing women's glasses upon his arrest. A trial took place on March 19, 1979, but the jury found him not guilty and acquitted him. However, he did return to prison for his original crimes, where he died of a heart attack on June 4, 1979 at the age of 35. The case went cold until DNA testing became more advanced. In the 1980s, a decade after Hart's death, a DNA test carried out on case evidence showed 3 of the 5 probes matched Hart's DNA. In 2008, there was a breakthrough when DNA tests were conducted on a pillowcase. Evidence appeared to show a partial female DNA profile. Although the experts confirmed the DNA didn't belong to 2 of the victims, they couldn't exclude the possibility of it belonging to the 3rd victim. However, many people, including Lori Farmer's mother, believe that there was a female present during the murders. Although a lot of evidence points towards Hart, none of it's 100% conclusive and the case remains unsolved. Camp Scott was shut down after the murders and never reopened. The girls' parents became advocates for victims and their families. Michelle Gousset's father established the Victims' Bill of Rights in Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Victims' Compensation Board. This bill keeps victims and families involved in every step of the legal process. Lori Farmer's mother founded the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children. This organization is dedicated to providing assistance and support to families of homicide victims. I'm 17 and teach gymnastics to young kids usually between the ages of 2 to 10. I regularly teach 19 classes a week, sometimes more. One of my regular classes has a girl with a stammer in it. Let's call her Jane. Jane is around 8 years old and has a stammer since I started coaching her almost a year ago. She used to be really quiet and hated talking, but as she's gotten used to the class and has become more confident, she talks more. One day, around 5 to 6 months into teaching her, I'm doing the register whilst my coworker is running a warm-up. While I'm doing this, I'm humming Shake It Off by Taylor Swift, which had just been played minutes earlier. Jane comes up to ask me a question and stops dead in her tracks, asking if that's Taylor Swift. Turns out, she loves Taylor's music and all of a sudden bursts into song. This takes me by surprise. A girl who wouldn't even speak to me a couple months ago is now singing at the top of her lungs. I feel a small sense of pride as she's become so much more confident in herself. For the rest of the lesson, I let her sing quietly as long as she joins in. The next week, however, she arrives singing very loudly and repeatedly stops my lesson to sing, not only stopping her class but also her peers. Multiple times I asked the group as a whole to be quiet in hopes that she would quiet down and stop annoying her peers and me. After 45 minutes, the other kids were frustrated at the constant singing and lack of respect for them as they had politely asked her multiple times to stop and she ignored them. I said the group doing an activity and then took her aside. I explained that there were other children in classes going on and she was disturbing them by being a bit loud and asked her to stop singing so loudly and maybe rest her voice as some of the other children preferred the quiet. I made sure to be especially understanding and kind with her as I know how much she struggles with things like this. She said okay and then went to join in. She didn't speak to anyone, including me, for the rest of the lesson, and at home time just got her shoes and left. I do feel bad for asking her to be quiet as her singing took a lot of confidence and she may be embarrassed now, but the other classes were going on and the other children were suffering because of it, so I do feel slightly justified. Am I the asshole for telling a girl with a stammer to be quiet?
Sitting in my red dress, waiting at the bar. I know that I am running out of favors, but can you pick me up? I could catch a bus, but I'd rather be in your car. I just want somebody I could talk to before I fall apart.
Story time about how my husband's trying to convince me to become an escort. Disclaimers, now my story time is sending me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for almost 6 years. We did get separated for 2 years, so technically we've been together for around 4 years. We had separated during COVID mainly because he doesn't want to have kids and I desperately want to have children. And yes, when we got married, we did talk about having kids and he said he wasn't sure. But after we got married, he basically told me that he did not want to have kids, which is obviously something that I did not sign up for when I married him. I began to resent him a lot because I could have been with somebody else, someone who wanted to have kids. But instead, I spent years with him only to find out that he did not want to have kids. I ended up asking him for a break, and that was basically during COVID. So we were basically broken up for all of 2020. This is where I'm assuming he started getting his ideas. We finally got back together in 2021. I had gone on a couple of dates with some really terrible guys, and I basically thought to myself, well, you know, my husband's not like that, so I guess I should get back with him. As soon as we moved in together, he started talking about escorts. He told me one of his friends uses an escort service, and he thought it might be a good idea to start one. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my husband's trying to convince me to become an escort. Disclaimers, now my story time is sending me on Instagram. After he told me he was thinking about starting his own escort agency, I completely lost it. First off, I didn't want my husband to be involved in that, and secondly, I just think it would bring so many problems. He told me that we should just think about it, and I asked him to show me numbers. You know, how much do people make? And he didn't know anything about it. He had done zero research. After that, we didn't speak about it for a few weeks. Not until he asked me what I thought about being an escort. At first, I was confused, like, me being an escort? Or what I thought about escorts being escorts. I told him escorts can do anything they want, as long as they're safe and happy. Then he said, well, we should look into you becoming an escort. I started to laugh and he's like, no, I'm serious. And that's when it hit me. This whole time he was trying to convince me to become an escort? His own wife? What does that say about us? What does that say about the relationship and how he feels about me? So I turned it around and told him that he should become an escort. Then he said, I'm not as good looking as you, so I wouldn't make enough money. That's when he confessed that he had signed me up to 2 different escort websites. And he had conversations with guys pretending to be me. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my husband's trying to get me to become an escort. That's when he confessed that he had already signed me up to several escort websites and that he had been having conversations with different men pretending to be me. Then he pulls out his phone and shows me all the conversations. Most of the men were trying to make me their sugar babies and were offering me upwards of $5,000 a month just to go on dates with him. The look in my husband's face was of excitement and happiness. I was mortified. I couldn't believe that my husband was even entertaining the idea. After he finishes showing me all of the messages between him and these other men, he tells me that we could be earning about $22,000 a month. And all I'd have to do is just go on dates with these guys. I started to cry and he told me that I was overreacting and that most women would kill to be in my place. I told him these men would expect much more than just going on dates. And he swears up and down that they won't. Now the thing is, we have had money trouble, so I see where he's coming from, but I just don't know. He's still trying to convince me and he shows me messages from these guys every single day. Most of these men are in their 50s, and one of these guys was actually really attractive. The money sounds so good, but I don't know what to do. I feel like I would resent my husband eventually. I mean, what if I fall in love with one of them? What should I do?
I feel like you're hostage, now your lover, hidden under covers. You only love me when you wake up. Is it me or am I not enough? Then you leave and I'm hollow. Some days I get so low, there has to be a way out. They say I'm lucky, but they don't live inside my head. It's where the demons at, it's where the demons at. They say I'm lucky, but they don't live inside my head. It's where the demons at, it's where the demons at. I feel like
Am I wrong for hooking up with my coworker's husband in the McDonald's break room? So, for a little backstory, when I was around 16, I started my first job working at McDonald's. About a year into it, this new cook had transferred to our store. He was older, like in his 30s, but we instantly hit it off and started dating on the down low. Since he was a lot older, I knew that if my family found out about us, they'd try to split us up. Well, after about a year of dating on the down low, that's exactly what happened. My mom was furious when she found out and forced me to cut off all contact with him. She took my phone privileges, wouldn't let me go out unsupervised, etc. However, I'd still see him here and there at work. I got promoted to manager eventually. Shortly after this, another manager who was well into her 40s starts talking to him. This manager is literally the devil. She screams at all of the employees except her one and only offspring, who also works with us and can do no wrong in her mother's eyes. She made multiple employees cry on the job and is just ruthless. Personally, I think she gets off on the power trip. We all hate her with a passion, but she's been working at this place for like 10 plus years and does the early morning shift that no one wants, so she's not going anywhere. Well, they get married pretty quickly, but he was still always messaging me and trying to talk to me when she wasn't around. I tried to do my best to ignore both of them by working opposite shifts because it was too much for me to handle. Seeing them together broke my heart because he was my first love and everything. So a few years go by and she has to go on a trip to see a sick family member for a few weeks. During this time, I take over her shifts and well, he's working at that time too. We both show up to open the store at 4:30 in the morning. At first, I kept it professional and ignored most of the conversations he tried to strike up. However, I eventually gave in and one thing led to another. There's cameras everywhere in the store except the break room. We ended up hooking up in there multiple times before the store opened. One morning, right after we hook up, I look up and see him on his knee with a ring. He had gone to Walmart and bought an engagement ring. He asked me to marry him and said it was the biggest regret of his life. He said that he would leave her for me and that he's never gotten over me. I kind of just shrugged him off because I was just in it for the D, but now he won't stop texting me and I feel kind of bad. So...
Am I the asshole for being in my underwear at home? I live with my mom and she's on vacation, so I've had the place to myself this week, which was nice. I was walking around in just my panties sometimes because I was home alone and the blinds were shut. One morning, that's all I was wearing. My mom's boyfriend came through the door. He and my mom don't live together and he has his own place with his son who is in his early 20s. He doesn't have a key here, but he used the key that my mom put under the doormat to come in. Previously, he's only been here when my mom was here unless she ran to the store and he was already here. Luckily, I turned around and started walking to my room, so he didn't see my cleavage, thank God, but he still saw what I was wearing by seeking the back of me. Not him nor my mom told me in advance that he was coming. I got dressed and then he started yelling at me for walking around in just my underwear.